There is not a person among us who do not owe a world of gratitude toward the men and women who serve in the armed forces. These especially dedicated people risk their lives and their futures in order to preserve our freedom and our way of life. To citizens around the globe, they are symbols of hope and sacrifice, and they should all be respected for their services. However, there are forces in this universe that are more powerful than the beating hearts of these patriots, and indeed more mysterious than some of the evils these brave soldiers have been sworn to defeat. Hello, I am author and paranormal investigator Donald Allen Kirch, and this is Stranger Than Fiction.
Forget the world you know. Enter a bizarre dimension where the strange and unusual guide your imagination towards the unimaginable. Life is stranger than fiction in these true stories, where the ordinary is replaced with the extraordinary. Explore strange legends, weird myths, and odd folklore. The facts are laid before you to examine. You're invited to draw your own conclusions on these true stories of the paranormal.
Tonight, I will be opening up a case file that has about as many theories, plots, and circumstances as there are grains in the sand of a desert. Indeed, this singular case is more responsible for both investigations into the Bermuda Triangle and extraterrestrial contact than any other modern-day case. Ladies and gentlemen, I am referring to the disappearance of Flight 19.
Thanks. I don't know where I am. My compass is broken. And I have no way of returning. The water is white, and the land is broken. Thanks. Where the hell am I?
Flight 19 was a squadron of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared off the eastern Florida coast on December 5, 1945. It was an absolute puzzle to the United States Navy, one of the greatest manhunts at sea since the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. A PBM Mariner flying boat also mysteriously vanished during the Navy's rescue mission. Altogether, 27 crew members, that includes the 14 airmen and 13 from the rescuing Mariner, were never heard from again. No one could ever figure out why.
Hey, what happened to the rescue plane off our port wing? I thought I saw the bank along with us.
Yes, copy. Have lost visual contact with rescue plane. Over. Need verification that plane is still on our vector. Over. Nas, do you copy last transmission? Over.
The story itself begins at the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The world had just gotten over the horror of the Second World War, and the United States Navy was gearing down to a post-war peacetime force, not too aware of the Cold War era that lay ahead of them. Flight 19 was to be a simple assignment. Called Navigation Problem Number 1, it was supposed to be a combination of bombing and navigational situations that were to take most of their flight day. No one, not the members of the flight team, nor those stationed at the naval base, had the slightest inkling of disaster. After all, Flight 19 was being commanded by a first-rate commanding officer. The flight leader was U.S. Navy Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. Taylor was a well-trained pilot with over 2,500 hours in the air, all on the type of aircraft that he had flown that fateful day. His students, albeit not as experienced as he, had amongst them over 300 hours in the air, 60 flight hours on the Avenger alone. All of the pilots involved knew and had flown within these waters, having completed several training missions successfully. The remaining pilots of Flight 19 were U.S. Marine Captain Edward Joseph Powers, U.S. Marine Captain George William Stivers, U.S. Marine Second Lieutenant Forrest James Gerber, and United States Navy Ensign Joseph Tipton Posey. Each Avenger had been fully inspected, fueled, and had passed with flying colors. All points of safety were double-checked and recorded, with one small exception. All 5 planes were missing clocks. This last was considered unimportant because the mission itself relied solely upon the pilot's skill to navigate and estimate distance by using actual time. And all the pilots wore their own watches. For some unknown reason, Taylor had tried to request off the flight due to personal reasons. Barring sickbay, the commanding officer of the base could never allow such a group of fighters to leave without an experienced pilot such as Taylor.
So Taylor, what gives? Got a stomach ache or something?
Sir, I can't explain it. I just don't feel up to doing this flight today. There's something wrong with me. I just can't put my finger on it. I respectfully ask the commander that I be taken off this flight.
Look, Taylor, if it were any other day, I would say, okay. But those kids need an experienced pilot to teach them the ropes. I'm sorry. Flight 19 is your baby. Suit up and return to the field.
Yes, sir.
So, regretfully, Taylor agreed to stay on the flight. To this day, no one has a record of what was actually bothering Lieutenant Taylor. Another reason for Taylor's denial for release was due to the fact that a fellow Flight 19 crewman had already been given permission to bump the flight, the limit for a flight crew during the course of a day. Marine Corporal Alan Kosnar had been the fortunate airman not to fly with the cursed squadron. To this day, no one knows, nor is there recorded, a name for the man who replaced him. In any case, Flight 19 had been cleared to leave the naval base at 13:45 local time during air and sea conditions recorded as favorable, sea state moderate to rough. The flight was late to depart, taking off at 14:10.
Okay, fellas, let's keep it tight this time around. I don't want any lost seats, so pay particular attention to your relative position with your wingman. Any problems? Squawk me. Yes, sir. Can you get out and push? All right, cut the chatter.
As planned, Taylor supervised the flight, allowing a pilot trainee to have the role as leader out front. The mission, navigation problem number 1, was to involve the squadron into 4 legs of their flight. In actuality, Flight 19 flew only 3 of these. After taking off, they all flew on a heading of 091, almost due east for 56 miles until they reached Hen and Chicken Shoals, where low-level bombing maneuvers were practiced. Almost 67 miles after the bombing, the team of planes continued onward in an easterly direction, turning on a course to 346 for another 73 miles. On this course, Flight 19 was to fly over the Grand Bahama Island. The third and fatal leg of the mission turned the group of Avengers on a course of 241, in which they would fly a combined distance of 120 miles, at the end of which they would turn left, returning to the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale. Simple enough. Naval records of the time do suggest that Flight 19's bombing run did go successfully. The reason they know this is because radio conversations recorded notate that a pilot from the group had called in about 1,500 hours requesting permission to drop his last bomb. 40 minutes later, flight instructor Lieutenant Robert F. Fox, leader of another training flight in the area, received an unidentified transmission, presumably from Flight 19.
Pilot calling Towers. Over. Please, repeat. Last transmission. Over. Is anyone there? Over.
From Lieutenant Fox's briefing afterwards, a student from Flight 19 had requested from Captain Powers a reading on his compass.
I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn.
Concerned, Fox tried his best to contact the pilots of the air group. Calling Captain Powers, Fox stated,
This is FT-74. Plane or boat calling Powers. Please identify yourself so someone can help you.
There came no response at first. Then, one by one, the pilots of Flight 19 talked amongst themselves, debating whether or not they should respond. Almost losing hope of offering help, Fox received a transmission using the call sign Foxtrot Tango 28. This was from Flight Leader Taylor. Eagerly, Fox did his best to offer assistance.
FT-28. This is FT-74. What is your trouble? Over.
Both of my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure. I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down. I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale.
Fox, following naval regulations, informed NAS that their planes were officially lost and that he was trying to communicate with the flight leader, hoping to aid them back to the base. Fox indicated that he suggested to Taylor that he put the Sun to his port wing and fly north, up the coast of Florida. A given time, Fort Lauderdale would be in their sights. Fort Lauderdale had instructed Fox to inquire if the planes on Flight 19 were equipped with IFF transmitters. This was so that the ground forces could triangulate the flight, discovering their true position, and thereby talking them back home. Later, Taylor would offhand admit that his transmitter was activated. Taylor seemed to do everything wrong. At 16:45, he transmitted,
We are heading 030 degrees for 45 minutes. Then we will fly north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico.
Taylor was immediately ordered to transfer his broadcast to 4805 kilocycles. He never followed those orders. Later, NAS asked him to transfer to 3,000 kilocycles. Taylor replied,
I cannot switch my frequencies. I must keep my planes intact.
At 1646, there were slight clues that confidence in the flight leader by the other Flight 19 pilots was starting to break down.
Change course to 090 degrees for 10 minutes. Excuse me, sir. If we could just fly west and return home. Head west, damn it.
Regardless of their questioning of authority, Flight 19 stayed together. One would have to ask, why? Flight 19 soon had other factors to consider: fuel and the weather. NAS had estimated as the weather conditions began to worsen that the unfortunate group of planes was more than 200 miles east of the Florida Peninsula. It was at this time, while trying to gather up enough of the rescue forces to help aid Flight 19, that the equally unlucky PBM-5 aircraft had been called out to help them. After transmitting only once, the Mariner aircraft was never heard from again.
We'll fly 270 degrees west until landfall or running out of gas.
Taylor requested a weather check. Land-based radars had triangulated Flight 19, the only time that it had, around a 100-mile radius of 29 degrees north and 79 degrees west. Flight 19 was nowhere near Florida, but north of the Bahamas, well off the coast. Amazingly, no one had thought to transmit this vital information to Taylor. At 1804, NAS received some of the last transmissions from the doomed group of Avengers.
Holding 270, we didn't fly far enough east. We may as well just turn around and fly east again.
The weather got worse. The radio operators listened.
All planes, close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together.
A British flag tanker, the SS Empire Viscount, had reported that she was heading into heavy seas and high winds northeast of the Bahamas at or around 1804, right within the estimated spot of Flight 19's disappearance. There is one more transmission, said to have come from an independent ham radio operator. Yet another naval aviator had tried to help Taylor hours after his last transmission. When requesting Flight 19's position so that the pilot could join them, Taylor issued a stern warning.
Do not, I repeat, do not engage. They appear to be from outer space.
This last transmission, however, cannot be confirmed by the United States Navy. After an extensive military investigation involving the largest land and sea rescue team ever assembled off the coast of Florida, all the Navy could say was,
We are not able to even make a good guess as to what happened. This is one of the strangest cases in naval aviation so far in my career.
Those who were in charge of the investigation of Flight 19 kept coming back to two haunting words: pilot error. Taylor had been known as a naval aviator who flew by the seat of his pants. Many times he had been reprimanded for not following proper safety protocols and procedures. Others theorized that Flight 19 had become the unfortunate victim of an Einstein-Rosen bridge and perhaps flew into another dimension. In any case, after the naval investigation, this official explanation was given to the public. Had Flight 19 actually been where Taylor believed it to be, landfall with the Florida coastline would have been reached in a matter of 10 to 20 minutes or less, depending on how far down they were. However, a later reconstruction of the incident showed that the islands visible to Taylor were probably the Bahamas, well northeast of the Keys, and that Flight 19 was actually where it should have been. The Board of Investigation found that because of his belief that he was on a base course toward Florida, Taylor actually guided the flight further northeast and out to sea. Further, it was general knowledge to NAS Fort Lauderdale that if a pilot ever became lost in the area, to fly a heading of 270 west, or in evening hours toward the sunset if the compass had failed. By the time the flight actually turned west, they were likely so far out to sea that they had already passed their aircraft's fuel endurance. This factor, combined with bad weather and the ditching characteristics of the Avenger, meant that there was little hope of rescue, even if they had managed to stay afloat. It is possible that Taylor overshot their course and instead reached another island mass south. He fully expected to find the Grand Bahama Island laying in front of him as planned. Instead, he eventually saw a landmass to his right side. Believing that this landmass to his right was the Grand Bahama Island and his compass was malfunctioning, he set a course to what he thought was southwest to head straight back to Fort Lauderdale. However, in reality, this changed his course further northwest toward open ocean. To further add to his confusion, he encountered a series of islands north of where he was, which looked very similar to the Key West Islands. But he was still over ocean instead of over Fort Lauderdale. The control tower then suggested that Taylor's team should fly west, which would have taken them to the landmass of Florida eventually. Taylor headed for what he thought was west, but in reality was northwest, almost parallel to Florida. After trying that for a while, and no land in sight, Taylor decided that it was impossible for them to fly so far west and not reach Florida. He believed that he might have been near the Key West Islands. What followed was a series of serious confusion between Taylor, his team, and the control tower. Taylor was not sure whether he was near Bahama or Key West, and he was not sure which direction was which due to his compass malfunction. Some of his teammates believed that their compasses were working. When that failed, Taylor set a course west according to their compass, which should have taken them to Florida if they were in Bahama. If Taylor stayed this course, he would have reached land before running out of fuel. However, at some point, Taylor decided that he had tried west long enough. He then once again set his course northeast, thinking that they were near Key West after all. Finally, his flight ran out of fuel and may have crashed into the ocean somewhere north of Abaco Island and east of Florida. There is also the Philadelphia experiment connection. During this time, the United States Navy was said to be working on camouflage equipment that would make both aircraft and ships invisible to enemy radar and also to sight. Is it possible that Flight 19 could have been the victim of a secret military operation that was so complex that the pilots and ground control did not understand the equipment that they were using? Could they have switched on a machine and not know how to turn it off? One could chalk up the whole event as a sad case of human error. However, keep in mind, these were highly trained men working within an organization that had been fighting a terrible war for over 4 years. These were not the type of men to just simply get lost. They knew the area in the seas in which they had been practicing in. Then there's that last transmission. Could it have been possible that Flight 19 had been victims of a cat-and-mouse game involving an alien intelligence bent to study the readiness of the world's military? Could there have been forces involved here that we may never understand? Like most people, my first introduction to Flight 19 was probably in the first 5 minutes of the sci-fi classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind, written, directed, and produced by Steven Spielberg. After seeing that scene where those 5 Navy planes were in the desert, I became curious and I looked into this. I personally believe that they were victims of an intelligence that was far beyond any capable of calling itself even human. One thing is for certain, Flight 19 is still one of the most famous disappearances to yet happen within the waters of the Bermuda Triangle. If you would like to read my work, go to my website at donaldallenkirch.com. That's Donald Allen, A-L-L-E-N, Kirch, K-I-R-C-H.com. One word, donaldallenkirch.com. My books are available in both ebook and print format. It would be an honor to entertain you. So, for Stranger Than Fiction, this is Donald Allen Kirch wishing you unpleasant dreams.